of Walter's interview. Maybe in a future day, somewhere in the future, we'll continue with more expanded history of his family and married life and kids. And I'm trying to focus more on just the church and his transition. We left off with Walter getting married to Steph Travinsky, June 27, 1970. And there were special years there in the 70s when he got married, living on Quebec Avenue. And I know during that time the Living Hope Singers started, a big part of my life and a big part of Walter's life. And his role as president of Eastern Canada that he briefly touched upon. And just his years here teaching Sunday school, we heard about that and the impact he had on a lot of our youth back then, mainly those that were teenagers before they got into the youth room. So Walter, if you can pick it up from there, I'm going to hand you something that you might have not seen for a long time, but this was one of the most professionally printed bulletins of Eastern Canada, and it impacted me because I started my newsletter in 1979, Breakthrough, when God intervened in my life and I was able to rededicate my life. But I look back at all of these, and of all the newsletters, we had some photocopied ones, cut and paste, but this was the most professional one. And in here you're listed as president, 1971 to 72, and so much happened here. Vice President, Mike graduated or promoted from treasurer to vice president. Stefania Kohut was secretary, Leslie Serafin was treasurer, Dan Siona and Mary Stribiak were members. The editor was Nell Siri, who at that time married Dan Siona, I believe, before you got married.
No, they got married after
okay.
A year after.
So you were, I think, one of the first couples that got married.
Walter Collins, Irene Collins were before us.
Late 60s then, okay. I sit corrected here. Walter and Irene first, and then yourself, Dan and Nell, and then Mike and Irene, and others as well.
Henry and Lily.
Henry and Lily.
Mary.
Associate editor was Dan Siona, and I know by them working on the newsletter, they kind of got connected there. And a lot of quotes in here, and this was an incredibly professional done newsletter. When you flip through here, there's stories of our youth, Walter, left and right. What are some of your memories? I interviewed Mary Stribiak up at Ocella, and there were the youth nights that you can briefly touch on here, the musical nights, the western nights that were downstairs. One day when you put a rock on a little brown Ukrainian night on a little brown pedestal, campfires that I know I remember being part of, and just try to touch on some of those highlights there that you remember fondly when you served here as president of the events that you hosted for the youth.
Peter, this publication, this news magazine was called Youth Echo. So we just kept that name back in those days. When you were overseeing the youth, it was Breakthrough, I believe.
I started with Breakthrough.
You and Paul Cleary with his artwork and stuff like that.
I was 11 years old when this came out and didn't read it until later on when I started doing mine.
And you say it's a professional-looking piece of work for that time. I actually took all the manuscripts to the printing press. I walked into a printing press. In fact, it was on Beverly, right near where City TV is up here on John Street in that area. I walked into the printing press, living lithographers or something like that. I know those two words, limited probably. And I talked to the fellow. I says, I would like to have this made into a booklet form. And the first thing he did was turn to the first page of the manuscript, and he looked at it and he says, he started laughing. You gotta be kidding. Walter Kohut, president? You gotta be kidding. I don't know this guy. He knows another person by the name of Walter Kohut. And it just so happens that I don't know this person, but my mother's best friend in Manitoba when they were growing up, her best friend, Mary Tymciw, married a Kohut. So his mother's name is Mary Kohut. My mother's name is Mary Kohut. My mother's son is Walter Kohut. Her son is Walter Kohut. So he had it mixed up here. And I said, yes, I heard of the other Walter Kohut. I'm not him. He knew him because he was family. So anyways, he had a good laugh about that. For the programs, we had many programs, many of them with a film, a gospel film. Actually, Paul Powers, near Agincourt in Scarborough area there, he worked out of a house distributing Christian films. If you wanted to rent one, you could rent a projector and likewise the film to be shown in the church. And Paul Powers, now we've got a connection here, and it's an important connection. His wife, I forget the last name, maiden name was Fishhook or Fishbank Powers. She wrote the poem, Footprints. I was in their house many times renting films. He was a fellow who would do gospel magic, a magician. He would strap himself into a straitjacket and all this kind of stuff. And he'd even show me designs, what he was working on for his next performance and stuff like this. So I got to know them quite well.
Who are the themes? Who picked all those themes? All the unique ones. Westernite and I know the film
Westernite was mine. That was mine because of my exposure to Youth for Christ in Vancouver on Saturday night. They had Western night, and plus I love to pick the banjo and the mandolin, and then with your brother Mike. Back in those days on television, one of the popular programs was Hee Haw. You had Roy Clark and Buck Owens. So Buck Owens on guitar and Roy Clark and they would pick a little bit and then they would do a joke, and they would pick a little bit and they would do a joke. And Mike and I sort of copied that downstairs, and we had everybody sitting downstairs on the floor as if you're on the prairies. We had a fireplace, we had the cactus lit up, we had bales of hay, and we had a guest speaker on that one, and we had pork and beans and wieners, just like out on the prairies, the chop wagon days. So that was one of
what was the one with I remember the big giant rock that you brought out and put on the little brown table. What was that night?
That was called Ukrainian night. And everybody, the adults are invited to this one. Yeah. That one was youth, and not only youth from this church, but from the surrounding Ukrainian churches, Niagara Falls, St. Catharines, Hamilton, Oshawa, and places like that. That was Ukrainian night, and we invited the parents too. I forget what we had, anyways, beef stroganoff, whatever. We had it that one. And I was not in charge of that one. I think it was Henry Jablonski or Pedro Masalika was in charge of that one. And if you speak Ukrainian, and if you say one word in English or any other language, you pay 1 cent penalty, and there was a big charge. It was a fundraiser. And I had read this poem by Taras Shevchenko, Ridna Mova, I believe. Now, anyways, whatever, it's in my mind. But anyways, Yuba Mova Krai Ridni or something like this. And Хто вас забуває, рідна мова є, той о грудях не серденько, тільки камінь має. You see, that was the final verse. And I had a big laugh about that because I asked one of the fellows, David Palep, I said, go outside, could you please find a rock? I was going to do an object lesson here with that. And so he had brought a nice sized stone, and I had it under the pulpit. This took place downstairs. And I seriously did this poem, and I came to that last line. Той о грудях не серденько, тільки камінь має. And I put my hand under the pulpit and pulled out this big stone and put it on top, plopped it right down. And I was going to die laughing, but we were going to sing a song after that. I was going to play the mandolin. So at that time, I just turned to get my mandolin back there, Mike and whoever came up to sing. But I was dying laughing. People talked about that one, says, how could he do it so seriously? And he didn't even smile or laugh. I was dying laughing. In fact, most of the laughter came out when we were rehearsing that. We did one program here where I did the slides. Instead of asking the people, the adults were invited to this, instead of asking the adults to sit down, I would just say, show that slide. Danny Siona, I believe, was operating the slide projector. Just show that slide, and it says on the slide, I made it myself. Be seated. You understand? But the thing is, the slide jammed halfway, so half the people were starting to sit and half stand, and then the film would come on. So that was just showing them, you don't have to tell them. And for an altar call after that film, I was going to do sort of an altar call, a little gospel presentation near the end for salvation, call for salvation. And I seriously, I says to your brother Mike, I says, Mike, you'll be in the baptistry back here. He had a little record player. This is just one of them little ones.
I remember.
And I says, that's when you plop some needle down on the Billy Graham choir singing, "Just as I am, without one plea, O Lamb of God, I come to thee." And as I'm inviting for people to respond to the film, the message of the film, Mike plops the needle down, and the speed wasn't correct. He had problems with the record.
33 or 45.
Yeah, it was a 45, but it was playing at 33. And it sounded like someone was choking a cow there. And Alphan, he takes the needle up. I said, "Oh, thank God, this is a serious moment." And before you know it, he's putting the needle down again, and the same cow being choked back there. So that was one of the humorous experiences we had here. We had Japanese night. This was when Walter Collins, his sister Lily, I believe, did a summer or student missionary stint in Japan. I believe we had Japanese night, Japanese food, the place decorated with flowers. Where did we get the flowers? We went to the funeral home and asked them, "Do you have any flowers that we can take?" We got them from Bates and Doug's, just west of here on Church Street. But many good times.
When I read from here, before we transition to Living Hope Singers, and we'll do an expanded version some other time on that, just to watch for the time that's left. The Young People's Nights up on the
Allison.
Jane Scarlet Road Old Mill on the water there. Do you remember those? When
Yes.
Mary fondly remember those. Mary Shpibyak, Mike playing on the piano and others singing, and people would walk by the campfire, the hot dogs.
Yes.
Do you remember that up in Toronto, up in the North End?
There were no piano there. There was
no piano,
just Mike on the guitar and me on the banjo. This took place. The conference, the Eastern Canadian Conference, usually took place in Toronto.
May or June.
It was always on the May long weekend, the Victoria Day long weekend. And on Saturday night, the youth would sort of participate, and after that there would be a wiener roast and just a bonfire and by the old mill. And the youth would sit around. The youth sang, Peter, in those days. It seemed that we all were on the same page with all these songs. We knew the songs.
Mary said on the weekend, this is Mary Shpibyak Winborn, there were songs that were sung back then that she's never sang them since that time. They were special songs. She misses them.
Yes.
And I remember all of that. I remember the wiener roast and the songs and the guitar. That went on for hours. And how people were walking along would stop and join in.
Yes.
And we don't know how many people were impacted and actually made decisions at campfires. It reminded me of the days when Brother Cooper was preaching, how the youth now actually took it to the campfire stage and how that was a great time to witness. What are they singing about? And I remember those days as well. So there's a campfire, special events like that. Before we transition, just quickly on your Bible school days, I'm going to just briefly ask you, it's during these days you get married and the group has started, and rather than getting into a lot of detail, the Living Hope Singers, what do you remember of the group starting and why you got involved in that, and just a few minutes on that, and then we'll look at your Bible study days, and then when you left the church in 1985. So just a few minutes on that, and then I'll continue in detail on those, but I just want to focus on those points. So what do you remember of the group starting? You're playing with Mike. He comes over to your place.
Yes.
You're married now. I think the group started in either 70 or 71. And the first members were in here, if you remember who the first members were. What are your recollections of that?
Recollections of that were... I would join Mike every so often before I joined the Living Hope Singers, before they were even called Living Hope Singers. Sometimes we'd have a youth program here, and when Mike would sing with his quartet, or Mike would sing a solo. I remember Kneel at the Cross, songs like that, and Life's Railway to Heaven, Life is Like a Mountain Railroad, and I would play the mandolin for them. I wasn't in the group yet, but when I got married...
So you were saying it was Dan Siona, Walter Cerf, and Mike started playing as a trio?
Yes.
Right? And then...
And while I was still dating, my wife played the accordion, so there was a few times she played the accordion and I played the guitar. Just a musical presentation, a musical number. When I got married, there was sort of a lull as to the music until probably 6 or 7, probably the winter of 71, when I joined. Actually, it was still 70, the winter. That I officially joined the Living Hope Singers. Mike had Mary Szczerbiak, the second one.
Lily Lubinsky.
There were the two Szczerbiak sisters there.
Well, Helen was later, because when I looked at the earlier ones, so it was Mary, Lily, and my sister Sue.
And your sister Sue.
And
then
George.
Mike.
Was George?
George and myself. George on the upright
There was
basis.
six of you.
Yes. And that is when we started getting involved, being invited to sing at youth events, especially in Oshawa and places like that, other churches, Gladstone Church.
What did that mean to you? What did the Living Hope Singers, in just one or two sentences before we in detail go into that in another section, if you wrap up, Mary said she had fond memories of the group. My life was greatly impacted by the group, but when you look at all those years from 70 to 85, what did the Living Hope Singers mean to you when you were part of this church?
I was 15 years with the group. I've always wanted, because with the brothers we weren't singers playing, but here you're presenting a message in song and word, and I had an opportunity to use some of my gifts as the master of MC for the group. I would be the speaker, and there were coffee house ministries and other instances where they required someone to bring a message. I had experience teaching the Sunday school class, and then from the teen years I was also assisting teaching Sunday school with Walter Ralph and sometimes Bowden Ralph at the youth classes. This is the college and careers already.
How much, and I'll try to get detail later there, on a scale of 0 to 100, how did you rate your time with the group? What did that do for you? Because I know what it did for me.
It was a dream come true.
You had your three instruments, you had your speaking, and you loved traveling?
I love traveling. And now my wife looked at it a little bit different. So I don't say it was smooth sailing on the home front.
Difficult days for all family members because of the amount of traveling.
There was practice every week. Every week there is practice, and you're dedicated, you're committed, and that's where you become good.
You imagine the schedule. Mary was saying church was everything. Sunday morning she walked to church, Sunday night, Friday night, then there was choir practice, and then there was youth night, and then there was Living Hope Singer practice. If you can imagine, when Mary was sharing that with me, almost every day of the week, coming to this church and doing one of those things. And I'm going to just stop you there, Walter, as we'll continue that in the next portion there. But the group, 15 years, and there were people that you met during that time. And when we're looking at the years, we're on the road quite a bit. I joined after Peter Kutsenko died, 1978. My brother joined the year prior, and that took us from the late 70s to the early 80s or mid-80s. And I'm just watching as the clock will wind down. I know those were years that we were in the church, and then Mary said, yes, she remembered 1 or 2 bookings a month. And I kept all the numbers. We were hitting 70, 80 engagements a year. And we were gone a lot. And that's why I don't remember a lot of your Sunday school classes, because we were gone a lot. And I'll share that a bit in my story as well. But I want to end off this portion just so I can end it off properly and then continue on some sub-areas like the group and speak about Peter Kutsenko for a few minutes, your Bible school, and what you've done since then. So I pulled out a letter. I hope you don't mind. It's not a reference letter, but I want to end off on this because this explains where our church was at and what happened to it. And it was your resignation letter from the church. And I've been going through all of my dad's stuff, and when I read this is the cry of the heart of every single person that grew up in the Ukrainian church. And if you don't mind, I'd like to read it. And we can end at the end of this letter if we have enough time, and just some of your thoughts. But this takes us right to 1985, and I hope I have 1 or 2 minutes left. And the group was just winding down in 1985, and what happened was, I remember very quickly, when my brother got married, I cried that night, but I knew he was moving up to the north part of Toronto to Slooks. When my sister got married and moved to Winnipeg, I had a big hole in my heart. I cried because I knew I wouldn't see her maybe once a year. And I know when Walter left the church for me in 1984-85, I looked forward more than anyone to him, connecting with him every weekend. And when he moved on, there was a big hole in my heart the same way. As I shared with Mary, there was a hole in my heart when we waited for young people's room, and when we got there, all the couples were gone. I never got to experience the young people's room the way I watched it before my very eyes. And that's where God used me to just start the chain from there. But if I get cut off in this letter, I'll continue in just a minute, but I'm going to start reading it and end off on that. It's January 8, 1985, written from 348 Rushholm Road, the elders, Ukrainian Evangelical Baptist Church. Greetings to you in Jesus' name. This letter is in regards to my verbal announcement to Elder Brother Eugene Kutsenko on December 16, 1984. On said date, I informed Brother Kutsenko that my wife Stefania and I, Walter Paul Kohut, will be resigning from our membership in the Ukrainian Evangelical Baptist Church, Toronto, effective January 1st, 1985. And my father was pastoring at that time, and that's why this is in his possession. Our resignation was prompted largely by the fact that there no longer is a Sunday school class for our daughter Amy's age group. And that was the whole state of all of our churches. The recent exodus of couples with children may have added to the fact. Also the absence of a full-time bilingual pastor. And how true that was a big problem in all of our churches, one we've never recovered from. My wife and I thank you for the opportunity we have had to be a part of this body of Christ. For the warm fellowship through glad times and sad times, we say thank you. For the much-needed experience gained to minister unto others, we are ever grateful, and we've heard Walter's impact in this church as well. May the Lord bless this congregation in these changing times. If there are any questions or solutions, and I don't think they were ever found, although they were there, it took people to implement them, and they never were. And I tried to be one of those solutions. In regards to our resignation, please feel free to call us and speak with us. Otherwise, be it known that as of January 1st, 1985, my wife Stefania and I are withdrawing our membership from the Ukrainian Evangelical Baptist Church in Toronto. Philippians 1:3, I thank my God in all my remembrance of you, signed Walter and his wife, Stefania. I'm going to end off there, and if we have a little bit more time, I'm just going to ask Walter of his thoughts from that when he did leave the church and when he moved on to Dovercourt Baptist and how God has used him there. This was the time when the LHS, also Living Hope Singers, came to a close. So thank you for joining us. This has brought us to the end of Walter coming into the doors of this church in 1968 and leaving in 1985, but always returning. He left officially, but he has been back.
I'm still connected.
Every year, every special Thanksgiving, and every special day. Thank you again, and we'll continue at another time. Bye for now.
Thank you.